Okay. So, atheist, agnostic, rationalist, free thinker, secular humanist, spiritual humanist, skeptic, you are all welcome here at Seattle Atheist Church. The reason that we use the name atheist is because we want to be really clear that you'll never hear anything supernatural talked about here. And where other churches exist to help you grow in other churches help you grow in faith, Seattle Atheist Church exists to help you grow in reason. So, recently I had an experience, it was about the same time that the church was just getting started. And a woman I know, her grandson was in a terrible accident. And I got this phone call, and the call went out, believe God for a miracle. And this is a really terrific, family, and it was a really sad and hard thing to hear that their son was in the ICU, right? And everyone was believing for a miracle. And at some point, this child didn't make it. And within the span of a couple of days, I heard God works in mysterious ways, multiple times. And at about the same time, I had just got started with Seattle Atheist Church, and so, as I always do, I ask people, anyone, their thoughts on it, their thoughts on atheism, and what they think atheists are like. And one thing that I got asked multiple times, or told multiple times really, is, well, atheists think they have all the answers. And the other thing is, why can't we just get along? Why can't Christians and atheists just get along? And actually, when I had the news that this young man had died, Stephen was out of town. I was home alone, and it was really sad, hard news for me. And I actually ended up having a visit with a friend of mine who is a Bible-believing Christian. And he knows that I'm an atheist. I know he's a Bible-believing Christian, and we just were able to just be together as two human beings and share some pie and talk about this young man's life. And so the idea that atheists and Christians can't just get along, in the most basic sense, is not true. And as far as the idea that atheists think they have all the answers, I felt like I was the only person in this entire situation that wasn't claiming to have answers, right? There was nothing really that I could offer. So there wasn't, we'll pray together, or, God has some greater plan for this. I was, as an atheist, I had to just kind of be there in this raw, nothing shielding me from just, this is the experience that this family is going through. But the question really of why should atheists have an atheist church, and is because, in situations like this, it's good to have a community, and it is good to have a place where we can kind of think about things long before tragedy strikes. I felt like I felt very alone because it was an uncomfortable place to be in the middle of all that kind of craziness that, if we only could believe, then we would have our prayers answered and this child would survive, because obviously no one would want to believe otherwise. And I just had to stand in the I don't know of it. So people say, well, atheism is just a belief in nothing. And on the one hand, it's true that atheists don't believe in gods. And then sometimes people say, well, you're not atheists, you're secular humanists. that's closer to the truth. I can live with you calling me a secular humanist. But this church in particular is founded on the principles of naturalism, which is an attempt to accept the world as it is. Metacognition, which is we want to think about our thinking so that we can hopefully become better thinkers. Constitutionalism, and also secular ethics. And so all of our talks are based around those ideas, and we actually invite anyone from the congregation to give a talk as long as it's an atheist talk. So this talk was promoted as a talk about faith healing, and it's partly about faith healing, and it's also partly about my bias or my hope that the more we know about science, that we can ultimately protect ourselves from believing supernatural or superstitious things, which I think often leads to really heartbreaking situations. So we don't, first of all, I think that most of us are not as good at critical thinking, myself included, as we think we are. So as a community, we want to be working on thinking about how we're thinking and deepening our commitment to rational thinking. And also, the majority of us really didn't receive the science education that we might have had, right? So just a really basic thing, let's take a basic animal cell. So many of us, when we were in school and we learned about animal cell, we made like a paper plate model of a cell. Put a nucleus in the center, maybe a large button or circle of construction paper. Maybe there's some macaroni ribosomes, some yarn, mitochondria. And it's a pretty flat understanding, pun intended, of life inside a cell. But today, any child can go on YouTube and can get like incredible representations of life inside a cell, so such that our ability, our knowledge about the world has expanded incredibly in the last like 50 years. There is a video online called Visualizing the Wonder of a Living Cell. And Harvard University commissioned this video for their students in their molecular and cellular biology department. And now that video is online on YouTube for anybody to see it. And this morning, our helpers dropped a grain of sand into people's hands. And what I'd like for you to consider is the size of a single cell to the size of a grain of salt. So up to 500 cells can fit into the space that is taken up by a grain of salt. And in addition to that, each cell has over 100,000 moving parts. So inside of the cell is manufacturing, transporting, building, and repairing itself constantly. So the creator of the video likened it to standing on a city street and seeing all the hustle and bustle that's going on around you. But your body has 100 trillion cells. So 5 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. And this is a lot of information to process about a single cell. So this is my what the image that I'm giving you to kind of show just the coming to terms with the amount of stuff that we just don't know, right? But I think that there is a threshold of knowledge that actually inoculates us, if you will, allow me, or protects us from believing superstitious things. And so what we need as a society is to make sure that all of our people get at least a basic science education. In the city of Seattle alone, here are some things that I have been witness to people believing, okay? These are all superstitious beliefs. They took place here in Seattle, and none of these things were even questioned at the time. So a friend of mine told me that she didn't have health insurance. She wasn't even going to get catastrophic health insurance because she believed in Reiki and Jen gemstone healing, and that she knew that whatever happened, she could deal with it with her friends giving her Reiki and also gemstone healing. Another woman I knew was taking yellow baths. So she was putting yellow food coloring into her bath to turn her bath water yellow because she believed that this was rebuilding her chi. She had kind of low energy, and so that was her solution for that, was to rebuild her chi. And, you know, low energy can be a sign of anemia. It can be a sign of a serious illness. And so it could be a dangerous thing to be doing that. Another woman had, while she was cleaning her bathtub, accidentally mixed some chemicals and had badly burned her lungs. And somebody said to her, well, have you heard of the New Age healer Louise Hay? I don't know if anybody here knows Louise Hay. But she said that Louise Hay says that the lungs represent communication. And so to heal yourself, what you need to do is you need to think about what you've left unsaid and communicate it. And that will help your lungs. Fortunately, what the woman left unsaid at this point was how completely, bonkers that advice was. A man that I know was in the late stages of cancer when he, too, was given a book that basically implied that he was the cause of his own cancer. That is, that cancer was caused by unresolved anger. So he was advised to think happy thoughts and to practice forgiveness in order to cure himself of cancer. So in putting this together, and we always put the talks up on the blog and usually use some images in the blog, so I found an affirmation card from Louise Hay. It just so happens that it really sums this idea up. I am ready to be healed. I am willing to forgive. And I think that that's actually a pretty widespread belief in America, that your negativity or your negative thoughts or repressed emotions or whatever can cause cancer. And without getting into all of the research on what they think might cause cancer and cancer treatments and all of that, let me just say that I think that saying something like that to somebody who has cancer is really cruel. So those are all kind of New Age examples of people healing illness with, their beliefs about healing. But what about healing through just old-fashioned prayer, the laying on of hands, or the anointing of oil? So a Fox News poll found that 93% of Americans believe that prayer can literally heal a person from illness or injury. And for that was 93% of people who go to church believe that. And for the general population, it was still 77% of people believe that prayer can heal. And I think actually even some atheists believe this, because what they believe in is, well, it wouldn't be divine intervention, but it would be, the placebo effect. And in fact, when it comes to prayer, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that prayer works, right? All of us, myself included, have some miraculous story of a situation where prayer worked. But what does the scientific evidence say? There have been a lot of studies on this, but the one I want to share with you is was kind of a gold standard of medical research. It's called STEP, a study of the therapeutic effects of prayer. And it looked at 1,800 patients from 6 different hospitals. And it was the John Templeton Foundation at Harvard University were behind this STEP study, which lasted for 10 years and cost $2.4 million. So the results of this scientific study were that people with the best outcomes were the ones not receiving any prayer. There was a 51% instance of complications or mortality for people who were not receiving prayer, but a 59% instance of complications, major complications and mortality for people who were receiving prayer and knew about it. So I want to be clear that I'm not claiming that prayer hurt. I'm not saying that prayer, had a harmful effect. I'm only saying that it didn't have a salubrious effect. And as you can expect, the theistic response to this is predictable. Like, if a study proved that prayer worked, then we wouldn't need faith, and we don't pray based on the study. We pray based on, the Bible and all of that. But in any case, I looked at a few studies where somebody had pointed me that proved that prayer worked, and then researched, and none of them show that prayer works in a scientific study. And so one of the questions is, well, what about faith healing where it's not combined with medical intervention? Because after all, if it's not done with medicine, then that would actually show you even more faith, right? And there aren't that many studies on that, but a couple of studies that looked at childhood mortality in families that had done faith healing, which another way of stating that is deaths caused by religious faith, combined with a lack of basic understanding of science and how the body works. And the researchers who looked into that found that 90% of those cases, the children could have been saved by medicine. So if we lose about 12 children a year this way, here is what the father of a 2-year-old whose child had type 1 diabetes and who refused to give her insulin therapy had to say. He said, "We believe in divine healing, that Jesus shed blood for our healing, and that he died on the cross to break the devil's power." So that's the belief of 6.9 billion Christians, but in this family's case, they're putting it to the ultimate test. And although, the majority of families would never deny medical care for their children, there are 14 states that have a religious exemption for felony crimes against children, including child endangerment, neglect. And 6 of those have exemptions for negligent homicide, manslaughter, and capital murder, which is when it's done by religious faith. So, what I want to suggest is maybe we can do away with this within a single generation if we just had better education, right? So instead of trying to prevent people from practicing their religion, what if we just try to make sure that people understand enough that they can make more informed decisions? And I believe that children in particular have a right to a good science education. So there's a book called The Good News Club that talks about some fundamentalist groups that are working in the United States. And among other things that they are trying to do is to affect the science curriculum. And this goes way beyond the question of creationism versus evolution. And that's the thing that I think mainstream people don't understand, is that the agenda is to prevent children from having to be in a position where they say, well, my science textbook teaches this, but my religion teaches this. Rather, they are allowed to always give the religious answer and not have to be responsible for taking the science test and knowing the science stuff. And they invoke a freedom of speech rather than a freedom of religion. So that children can actually graduate from a high school in the United States without having to learn any basic science. But this isn't just for Christian groups, which are targeting the public schools, or for homeschoolers, but Naftuli Moster, who is a Hasidic Jew, is bringing a lawsuit against the New York City School Board because his high school experience did not include some basic science concepts. And the Hasidic schools receive millions of dollars in government money, and they are required by law to provide an equivalent education. And so he's trying to hold them to that standard now. And I think that as a society, we should be holding all schools, including homeschools. Well, then that gets into a whole other thing, like how much do you want to tell people what they need to teach their children? But education is a human rights issue. And so one could argue that science education is part of receiving an education. And so to close, I want to talk about some of the benefits that we get from science. But I also, since we have some new people here, I also want to say, like, this isn't church based on science, because we sometimes do talks on other things, morality, personal responsibility, intuition, other things. But this is, it is true that for me, science gives us a lot of hope for modern health. So in the last century alone, we have extended the life expectancy in the United States by 29 years. And we've done that mostly by wiping out childhood deaths and diseases in childhood, because in 1900, about 30% of children died before the age of 5. And as of 1997, that was down to only 1.4%. So vaccinations have practically eliminated diseases that were common: polio, diphtheria, tetanus, smallpox, measles, mumps, rubella, and type B meningitis. Rodent control has pretty much kept us plague-free for 90 years. We had an outbreak of plague in the 20s. Public water systems and sewage disposal systems and the increased knowledge of simply washing our hands have reduced cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, influenza, yellow fever, and malaria. And it turns out that just washing our hands, having access to clean water where we can wash our hands, is one of the most important things that we can do to keep ourselves and other people healthy. So it's good to be reminded of that too. Here are a few other things which are all non-mysterious ways to end human suffering, which have been developed in this last century. Insulin, blood typing, antibiotics, antifungals, antiparasitics, blood drives, blood cord storage, penicillin, pap smears, face transplants, the HPV vaccine, mammography, dialysis, blood transfusions, food labeling, sex change operations, health tracking apps, testing for infectious disease, MRIs, human organ transplants, and bionic limbs. A couple of things that I personally am super looking forward to are a needle-free diabetes patch. So anybody who is an insulin-dependent diabetic can have a needle-free experience. And also, very soon, we should have the eradication of guinea worm, which is a painful disease where the parasite literally bores from the inside of the body to the outside of the body. But they believe that they can, we can get rid of guinea worm. So our standard closing, or at least when I'm up here, is this: that atheists believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. And so, thank you very much.